Welcome to the Claire and Horatio Daily World Brief for today, June 10th, 2026. Imagine you check your email tomorrow morning to download your 2026 World Cup tickets, only to find a notification that your transaction has been legally blocked by the United States Treasury Department.
Which is a jarring reality for thousands of people today.
It really is. And the reason why is that thousands of miles away, an Iranian drone just shot down an American helicopter, and the resulting geopolitical shockwave has severed your access to a soccer stadium. We are looking at the cascading collateral damage of state actions today. The United States and Iran are exchanging direct military fire, which is effectively closing off the Strait of Hormuz and spilling violence into Lebanon.
And we're going to unpack how that exact conflict is weaponizing international banking against sports fans.
Plus, we are investigating a brutal crackdown on women in Afghanistan, the terrifyingly thin margins of survival following a massive 7.8 magnitude earthquake in the Philippines, a massacre tied to the underground gold trade in South Africa, and, well, a really bizarre cultural collision involving President Trump, military airstrikes, and Japanese anime.
The timeline of the last 48 hours in the Middle East really requires some serious dissection to understand how we got here. On Monday, an Iranian drone destroyed a U.S. Apache helicopter that was patrolling the Strait of Hormuz.
Which prompted an immediate military response from Washington, setting off this current escalation.
Exactly. U.S. Central Command struck back on Tuesday. They targeted Iranian defense, ground control, and radar sites near the strait. But the crucial detail here is that the retaliation didn't come from the standard Iranian military. It came from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and they launched strikes on 21 different targets at U.S. bases across Bahrain, Jordan, and Kuwait.
Wait, let's clarify the mechanics of that military structure for the listener. Why is the IRGC driving this specific tactical response instead of Iran's traditional armed forces?
Well, the IRGC functions as a parallel military organization in Iran. It's specifically designed to protect the country's ideological system and, project extraterritorial power.
So they operate with a completely different mandate than conventional border defense.
Precisely. They control Iran's ballistic missile programs and coordinate directly with regional proxy militias. So when the United States strikes Iranian radar sites, the IRGC views this not just as a military skirmish, but as a direct challenge to the survival of the regime itself. Their decision to hit U.S. bases in 3 different sovereign nations is a very calculated demonstration of their regional reach.
And we saw Kuwait's military actually having to actively intercept those incoming attacks. Though U.S. officials did note that almost all projectiles were shot down with 0 reported casualties. But the public messaging from Washington completely contradicts that level of active warfare. On Tuesday, President Trump told journalists the U.S. and Iran were in the, quote, final throes of what will be a very, very good deal.
Which is a statement that aged quite poorly within 24 hours. Because by Wednesday morning, he posted on Truth Social that Iran's military is a complete and total mess, claiming they are completely defeated and will have to pay the price.
So how does diplomatic negotiation even survive when the active fire and the public rhetoric exist in 2 totally different realities? I mean, we have active missiles being intercepted over Jordan while the president claims total victory.
It doesn't survive. It collapses entirely. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Bakai explicitly cited these contradictory messages and repeated ceasefire violations as the reason diplomacy is failing. You really cannot establish a baseline for negotiations when one side claims imminent victory and the other is launching drones across the Persian Gulf.
The immediate, tangible consequence of this breakdown being the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz since late February. We are talking about a maritime choke point that handles roughly 20% of the world's global oil consumption.
And that spike in energy costs and the disruption to global shipping routes, it acts as a massive, unavoidable tax on the global economy. But that instability is physically spilling over borders too. Despite a pause in hostilities on Monday, Israel launched deadly air and artillery strikes across southern Lebanon on Tuesday, killing at least 13 people.
And for the first time, the Israeli military ordered the evacuation of the Christian quarter of Tyre, pushing residents north beyond the Zahrani River. That signifies a major expansion of the conflict zone.
The sheer scale of the human tragedy in Lebanon frequently gets lost in the broader geopolitical chess match. According to the Lebanese Health Ministry, over 3,666 people have been killed, and almost 1 million people, which is a full fifth of Lebanon's population, are currently displaced. Pushing an evacuation order into a historically significant urban center like Tyre severely complicates any U.S. efforts to broker a regional peace deal.
That expanding military theater brings us directly to the North American World Cup, which actually kicks off tomorrow. I mean, Iran qualified for the tournament. Their fans legally purchased tickets.
But now, well, the 8% ticket allocation for their group stage matches has been entirely revoked.
So how does a domestic United States government agency force a Swiss organization like FIFA to cancel tickets for Iranian citizens? It really feels like the geopolitical blockade has been entirely copy-pasted onto a football tournament.
The mechanism doing the blocking is the U.S. Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC. Because the United States dollar is the primary reserve currency of the world, almost all international financial transactions ultimately route through U.S.-based banking infrastructure or correspondent banks.
Meaning OFAC can place strict legal limits on the ability of any entity touching the U.S. financial system to process money involving Iran.
Right. FIFA might be based in Switzerland, but they rely on global financial networks to process ticket sales. OFAC enforces trade sanctions rigorously, with massive penalties for institutions that violate them. So, the banking transaction for these tickets simply cannot legally clear.
So the tickets allocated to the Iranian Football Federation will likely just go back on general sale, leaving thousands of Iranian fans who already booked flights and hotels completely stranded. It raises a serious question for you, the listener. Can international civic events even function when the host nation's foreign policy regulations legally forbid participation by the citizens of a qualifying country?
And it doesn't stop at the fans. Iran's national team was forced to abandon their training base in Arizona and relocate to Tijuana, Mexico. Furthermore, 15 of their administrative staff members were outright denied U.S. visas.
And U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio compounded that friction by warning that anyone linked to the IRGC faces strict entry restrictions.
Which has left the Iranian Football Federation furious. They are publicly accusing the United States of political interference and violating the fundamental principle of equality among participating nations.
The practical reality for the Iranian team is just absurd. Under their current visa conditions, they have to fly across the border from Mexico into the United States on the actual match day for their group games, starting with New Zealand in Los Angeles on June 15th.
It's a logistical nightmare for a team trying to compete at the highest level of global sports.
Speaking of global events, I want to quickly remind you that for more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, you can visit clarinoratio.com. Now, we are seeing a totally different manifestation of state violence in Afghanistan today, where civilians are caught in this dual crisis of lethal foreign airstrikes on the borders and violent domestic crackdowns in the cities.
Pakistan recently launched airstrikes into the eastern Afghan provinces of Kunar, Khost, and Paktika. Pakistan's information minister, Atullah Tarar, justified the bombardment as calibrated strikes responding to terrorist incidents inside Pakistani territory, claiming they eliminated 26 militants.
But the Taliban government in Kabul presents a totally different forensic reality, claiming the strikes killed 13 people, including 11 children.
The border region is notoriously porous, serving as a haven for various militant groups. But the collateral damage from these cross-border bombings consistently falls on rural Afghan families who have zero involvement in international militancy.
The tragic irony here is just staggering. The Taliban government is demanding international condemnation for Pakistani airstrikes by arguing they violate Afghan sovereignty and kill civilians, while simultaneously turning live firearms on their own female citizens in Herat who are simply protesting for basic bodily autonomy.
The domestic situation in Herat escalated violently over the last few days. The Ministry for Propagation of Virtue and Prevention of Vice, essentially the Taliban's morality police, initiated a severe sudden crackdown. They've been setting up checkpoints, stopping cars and rickshaws to detain women they perceive to be wearing improper hijab.
Which provoked a rare, desperate public protest where men and women actually took to the streets to demonstrate against this morality police. But using the term protest almost feels inadequate given the lethal stakes, especially since medics reported to the BBC that at least 2 people died when security forces moved in to crush the demonstration.
Witnesses detailed horrifying scenes of Taliban police using sticks, whips, and ultimately live firearms to break up the crowd. They fired shots into the air and directly at protesters. The Herat Police Command issued a statement justifying the lethal force by claiming the demonstrators were disturbing public order and opposing a, quote, divine obligation.
When you consider the environment, since the Taliban retook power in August 2021, women face threats of severe beatings or indefinite imprisonment for speaking out. The sheer bravery required to walk into those streets is incomprehensible.
Videos emerging from Herat show women screaming at armed police to stop beating civilians, chanting for education, work, and freedom while staring down the barrels of rifles.
Shifting our focus from man-made violence, I want you to think about your own morning routine. If you had, say, poured your coffee 5 minutes later today or missed a single traffic light, your entire day shifts. In our next story, that razor-thin margin of timing was the difference between life and death for thousands of children as a massive 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck the southern Philippine island of Mindanao on Monday morning.
The sheer tectonic violence of a 7.8 magnitude event is difficult to overstate. The death toll currently stands at 37, with nearly 500 injured, but authorities expect those figures to climb. The infrastructural damage is catastrophic, with landslides completely burying vital highways.
Which means the Philippine government is entirely reliant on airline relief into far-flung coastal cities and mountain villages because the physical roads no longer exist. Plus, close to 2,000 homes and 6,000 public schools suffered severe structural damage.
The footage circulating from CCTV cameras is terrifying. There is a video of a popular Jollibee fast food branch in General Santos City simply folding in on itself and collapsing to the ground. But the detail about the 6,000 damaged public schools contains a miraculous caveat.
Right. Science Minister and seismologist Renato Saladum highlighted the crucial timing of the rupture. Since the earthquake struck on a Monday morning across the Philippines, public schools hold a mandatory outdoor flag ceremony at the start of the week.
So when the ground began violently rocking for more than 2 minutes, thousands of students were already sitting on the grass outside. They watched the building shake and fracture from a safe distance.
It's a terrifying thought experiment for you to consider. If the tectonic plates beneath the Cotabato Trench had shifted just 15 minutes later, those thousands of 13-year-olds would have been sitting at their desks inside those collapsing structures. It really highlights how survival in a natural disaster often hinges entirely on the randomness of a daily routine.
And the Cotabato Trench, located off the country's southern tip along the Pacific Ring of Fire, has a lethal history. In 1976, movement along this specific fault line generated a 7.9 magnitude earthquake and a subsequent tsunami that killed approximately 5,000 people. The island is currently enduring hundreds of strong aftershocks, which keeps the population in a constant state of terror and severely impedes the medical airlift operations.
Moving to a different kind of infrastructural breakdown, when we look at South Africa, we see a collapse of physical safety that isn't caused by a formal war or a tectonic shift, but by a massive void in local governance. Police in Johannesburg are currently hunting for suspects following a mass shooting at the Jumpers Informal Settlement in Cleveland.
Late Tuesday night, a white Toyota Quantum pulled up to the settlement. At least 10 heavily armed suspects entered through both access points and systematically moved through the area, opening fire on residents. They murdered 12 people, 8 men and 4 women, and injured 9 others. The provincial police commissioner labeled the attack heartless and barbaric.
But community members believe this is a turf war between groups of illegal miners, locally known as Zama-Zamas, targeting disused commercial gold mines. How does this illicit gold trade actually function in the shadows of Johannesburg?
South Africa is deeply scarred by thousands of abandoned commercial gold mines. Because formal economic opportunities in these areas are practically non-existent, organized syndicates send heavily armed, desperate workers, the Zama-Zamas, deep into these dangerous, unmaintained shafts to extract trace amounts of gold. The syndicates then launder this illicit gold into the formal global market.
The statistics here are grim. There are an estimated 3 million legally held firearms in the country, mirrored by at least 3 million unlicensed illegal weapons circulating in the black market. When you have a massive black market for gold colliding with millions of illegal weapons, it turns these informal settlements into literal war zones.
Which is why rival syndicates engage in outright warfare over access to the most lucrative abandoned shafts. The profits are astronomical, and the territory is entirely unregulated by the state.
President Cyril Ramaphosa deployed the military earlier this year to shut down these operations, but isn't that just a temporary band-aid on a much deeper failure of local governance and economic opportunity?
It absolutely is. The military can secure a perimeter temporarily, but the underlying economy of illegal mining thrives because regulatory oversight of mining infrastructure has failed. The civilians living in corrugated tin structures in places like the Jumper settlement inevitably bear the lethal brunt of this illicit resource extraction, caught in the crossfire of syndicates fighting over a shadow economy.
On a somewhat related note regarding how local lives are impacted by massive external forces, we are closing today with a story about cultural collateral. It examines how domestic political messaging can violently collide with international cultural values. A massive backlash is currently unfolding in Japan because President Trump has been using iconic anime characters in his social media posts.
Over the past week, the official White House accounts, as well as the president's personal Truth Social and X feeds, began posting images and clips of characters from Naruto, Pikachu, and Yu-Gi-Oh! But the controversy stems entirely from the context.
Because these beloved characters were edited into actual footage of U.S. military strikes on Iranian targets. In one specific video, President Trump's face was superimposed onto the ninja Naruto as he launched an attack.
In a globalized digital ecosystem, algorithms immediately push high-engagement posts from a U.S. president to users worldwide, including the Japanese fan bases of these franchises. The condemnation was swift. The Pokemon Company International issued a rare public statement clarifying they did not grant permission.
They emphasized that their corporate mission to bring the world together is fundamentally incompatible with any political or military agenda. Simultaneously, a grassroots petition demanding the White House respect Japanese creators has gathered nearly 20,000 signatures.
It might be easy to brush this off as trivial internet meme culture, but these Japanese creators built global entertainment empires, heavily rooted in post-war themes of pacifism, friendship, and courage.
Which makes this a fascinating study in soft power. Seeing their life's work repurposed to soundtrack military strikes against Iran clearly strikes a profound cultural nerve.
Kanagawa resident Nana Suzuki, who started the petition, highlighted a deeply poignant detail regarding Kazuki Takahashi, the creator of Yu-Gi-Oh! Takahashi tragically died while attempting to rescue 3 people from drowning in a riptide off the coast of Okinawa.
So his noble spirit and the core message of his life's work were literally dedicated to saving others. Using his intellectual property as a hype soundtrack for a military bombing campaign in the Middle East feels like a profound desecration to fans who grew up internalizing those values.
It proves how international intellectual property is increasingly and uncontrollably drafted into domestic U.S. political warfare.
As you watch the World Cup begin tomorrow under the shadow of sanctions, or consider how a beloved Japanese cartoon was dragged into a Middle Eastern military conflict, it's worth asking, is there any space left in 2026, whether it's sports, art, or a daily commute, that isn't instantly weaponized by global tensions? Thank you for your time today. For more Daily World briefs and classic audiobooks, please visit clarinarratio.com.